The max factor. That's the phrase Red Bull team principal Laurent Mekies chose in a post-race breakdown of exactly why his car finished second when it had no business doing so. Not a good strategy, not a strong team performance. A factor with a driver's first name attached to it, as if the car itself needed a separate line item just to account for the man driving it. In this video, you'll understand why that specific phrasing matters more than a generic compliment ever could, and why the car this praise is describing makes it worth taking seriously. Here's the context that makes the max factor worth examining closely. This was not a weekend where Red Bull's car was performing well, and its driver simply capitalized on strong machinery. This was the opposite. Across practice and qualifying, Max Verstappen had been publicly, repeatedly furious with the RB22, calling it completely broken aerodynamically over team radio, describing the car as just getting worse and worse, and telling his own team plainly, "I'm sorry, but for me it's just completely undrivable." If you want the stories the paddock doesn't put in the press releases, subscribe right now, and drop a comment telling me which country you're watching from, because what this driver did with a car this broken deserves more attention than one race report usually gives it. Was this simply a driver venting frustration that turned out to be overblown? Was the car actually fine, and Verstappen just having an off weekend emotionally? Or was the car genuinely as compromised as he described, making whatever happened next entirely down to him? Here's what actually happened on track, and it's worth laying out precisely because the gap between the car was broken and the car finished second is the entire story. Verstappen qualified sixth, well off the pace, still fighting the same handling issues that had plagued him all weekend. Grid penalties for Lewis Hamilton and Kimi Antonelli promoted him to fourth for the race start. From there, he made his way to third on the opening lap, overtaking Charles Leclerc before the first corner had even settled. Keep that in mind. It comes back. After the first round of pit stops, Verstappen found himself behind his old title rival, Lewis Hamilton, in a Ferrari that had looked like the fastest car all weekend. This is where the moment everyone's still talking about happened. A lap 16 dive down the inside at turn 1, a move race commentators would later call one of the passes of the season. Verstappen took the position and, crucially, held it. From there, Red Bull made two calls that could easily have backfired. They put Verstappen on soft tires for the final stint, an aggressive choice on a car that had shown handling problems all weekend, and then kept him out on track during a late virtual safety car, while the Ferraris pitted for fresh rubber. Both calls paid off. Verstappen crossed the line second, splitting Norris and Antonelli on a car his own team knew wasn't good enough to be there. And if you're not subscribed yet, this is exactly the kind of story you'll want to be here for. Because a podium finish that shouldn't have happened, on a car that was publicly criticized by its own driver all weekend, doesn't happen without something specific going right. Here's the credential stacking that makes Mekies' assessment worth trusting. Because this isn't a broadcast pundit speculating from a commentary booth about who drove well. This is the man who runs the team, who watched the telemetry from both cars, who had every reason to credit the strategy team or the tire choice if that's genuinely what won the race, and who instead, when breaking down the podium into its component parts, put one specific factor front and center. Speaking to Speedweek after the race, Mekies laid out exactly 3 reasons for the result. "I think there were 3 key factors behind this fine second place," he said. "Firstly, our race pace was better than our pace in practice. That wasn't necessarily to be expected, as we'd had major problems with the car's balance. That's factor 1. And notice it's about the car, phrased with genuine surprise that it worked at all. Then came factor 2. The second factor is what we call our max factor here. Verstappen overtook Hamilton, which was crucial during the race, and he later managed his soft tires perfectly, even though he had to drive on them for so long." Read that structure carefully because it's doing something specific. Mekies didn't say the car performed well and the driver did his job. He separated the car's performance, factor 1, described almost apologetically, from the driver's performance, which got its own name. A team boss naming a specific factor after his own driver, in the same breath as admitting the car had major problems with balance, is not empty praise. It's an accounting exercise and the driver got his own column. Was Mekies simply being generous to his driver in a post-race interview, the way team bosses often are? Or does crediting a specific overtake by name as a distinct causal factor in the result reflect something closer to an honest technical assessment? The context suggests the latter, because Mekies didn't need to separate the car's pace from the driver's overtake at all. He could have simply said, "Great team result." He chose instead to draw a clear line between what the car did and what Verstappen did. Here's the comparison that actually puts this in perspective, because a chief crediting his driver after a good result is, on its own, an unremarkable thing to hear in this sport. What makes this one worth a second look is what the same driver had been saying about the same car just one day earlier. In qualifying, Verstappen didn't hold back. The car just kept getting worse and worse lap after lap. He called the RB22 not drivable during the same weekend. Media outlets would later describe as leaving Red Bull with a podium the car itself, in the words of one analysis, didn't deserve. Verstappen, the same analysis argued, certainly did. Put those two accounts side by side, the driver publicly calling the car broken on Saturday, and the team principal publicly crediting the driver by name, separate from the car, on Sunday. Neither claim alone tells you everything. Together, they describe a result where the machinery and the man behind the wheel are being assessed as two entirely separate variables, and only one of them gets called a factor worth naming. What was Verstappen actually navigating in that overtake? Committing to a move on a car he'd already found unpredictable under braking all weekend, against a driver with the pace advantage in a straight fight? Or backing off, protecting the position he already had, and accepting third instead of gambling on a pass with a car he didn't fully trust? He chose to commit on a car whose braking behavior he himself wasn't confident in 24 hours earlier. Let's put a number on what that specific overtake protected, because crucial during the race undersells it. Verstappen's fourth podium of the season came from a starting position that only existed because of penalties elsewhere on the grid, but holding third, then defending it against exactly the driver he'd just passed for the remainder of the stint, is what turned a fortunate grid slot into an actual points result that stuck. Red Bull's own team principal identified that specific action, not the tire strategy, not the car's raw pace, as the second of only 3 factors he named for the entire race. 3 weeks before any of this, Verstappen had been candid about where Red Bull genuinely stood, struggling with a car generation he's publicly called anti-racing, comparing the handling to Mario Kart, and openly discussing his frustration with the sport's current regulations. That's not a driver who was quietly confident heading into Hungary. That's a driver who arrived expecting very little from his machinery and delivered a result that outperformed every reasonable expectation anyway. The honest steelman deserves real weight here because Mekies' framing isn't beyond question. Team principals often credit drivers generously in the immediate afterglow of an unexpected result. It's good for morale, good for sponsors, good for a driver whose future at the team has been the subject of persistent rumors all season. Crediting Verstappen by name might simply be smart management, not a genuinely separate technical assessment. That's a defensible read. It is also not the red that explains why Mekies chose to structure his 3 factors the way he did, car pace, driver overtake, strategy team, rather than simply saying, everyone did their job. Separating the driver's action into its own named factor, immediately after describing the car's performance as a pleasant surprise the team hadn't necessarily expected, is a specific kind of praise. It's not hype. It's closer to an engineer's breakdown of where the result actually came from. Do I know for certain whether Red Bull would have finished on the podium with a different driver in that seat, on that same car, that same weekend? No, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. It's not proven. Podiums involve strategy calls, tire luck, and a dozen variables beyond one overtake. But it's exactly the question anyone who heard Verstappen call this car undrivable one day and watched him split 2 faster cars on the podium the next is entitled to ask. Zoom out from this one Sunday because this isn't really about one overtake. This is a driver whose future at Red Bull has been openly speculated about all season, on a car the team itself has struggled to make competitive against Mercedes, Ferrari, and McLaren throughout 2026. When a team principal names his driver as a distinct, separately credited factor in an unexpected result, rather than folding that credit into a generic team compliment, it's a signal about where that team believes its actual competitive advantage currently lives, car troubles notwithstanding. So tell me, was he always this good under pressure? And it just took a genuinely broken car for everyone to see exactly how much of Red Bull's results this season have actually been him? Like this video for one answer, comment for the other. The comments are yours. Zandvoort and Monza are next after the summer break, and Red Bull will arrive at both circuits still trying to solve the same balance issues that made Verstappen's own words about this car so blunt all weekend. Whether the next result comes from the car finally catching up, or from another Max factor doing the heavy lifting again, will tell us a great deal about where this team's championship hopes actually rest for the rest of the season. This story is not over, and when the next factor gets named, you'll want to already have this file open until the next one.